On Friday, an officer who shot and killed a 17-year-old black teenager by firing at him running away was acquitted by a jury of the criminal charges he was facing. It was in June of 2018 that Officer Michael Rosfeld pulled over a vehicle that matched the description of a vehicle that was involved in a drive-by shooting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 17-year-old Antwon Rose was in that vehicle, but he was not the one that was guilty of firing any shots. Officer Rosfeld got the driver out of the vehicle and had him on the ground. Just after that happened, two other occupants in this vehicle bolted from the vehicle, and that included Antwon Rose. The other occupant was Zywan Hester. They're both 17, and they ran away from the vehicle, straight away from the officer. The officer was on the left side of the vehicle, on the driver's side. The two teenagers got out of the passenger side of the vehicle and ran away. Rosfeld shot at them running away. Rosfeld was able to hit Antwon Rose in the back, the side of the face, and his arm. There was video of this incident, but in spite of that, it took the jury less than 4 hours to return a verdict of not guilty. Now, when we talked about this in 2018, we played the video, and at this point, it's unnecessary to do so once again. But you can clearly see from the video that Officer Rosfeld was on the left side of the screen. He was on the driver's side of the vehicle, and the two occupants, including Antwon Rose, they got out on the passenger side and ran away from the vehicle. So we talk about these cases constantly. We talk about these instances constantly, and we talk about police brutality, police misconduct, bad shoots. We talk about this constantly, and when we talk about that, we talk about transparency, we talk about accountability. And when we talk about accountability, we always say that there are several levels. There are several levels where accountability must be had. And at first, it starts with law enforcement. It starts with that police officer's own precinct or department. They would have to hold that officer accountable. The district attorney's office would have to hold that officer accountable. The grand jury would have to hold that officer accountable. A jury of the officer's peers would have to hold the officer accountable. And then finally, the judge would have to hold that, if it makes it that far, the judge would have to hold that officer accountable as well in terms of sentencing. Now, again, when we talk about these instances, somewhere along this path, something gets messed up. Something always gets in the way of justice and accountability. So that's exactly what happened here. This was a case where an officer did act as judge, jury, and executioner. And because he wears the badge, wears the uniform, a jury of his peers in just under 4 hours was able to pin the killing on Antwon Rose himself. Antwon Rose, 17-year-old Antwon Rose, is guilty of his own demise.
He didn't have a record either. Now, Will, typically, what's law enforcement protocol when it comes to suspects that are running away?
What's protocol?
Usually the case.
Well, you would call for backup.
Yeah.
And you would proceed to try to apprehend.
Now, also
the suspect.
Also, protocol in regard to firing at a suspect that is running away. Mm-hmm. Usually, what kind of has to be present?
Imminent danger.
Imminent danger, like harm to another officer.
Right. A threat on your life.
Threat on the officer's life, or
right.
A threat to other people's lives.
Correct.
So that would have to be the mindset of the officer at the time he shot Antwon Rose. That Antwon Rose, who he did not see had a weapon, was going to shoot someone or cause violence or harm to someone else. Because obviously in that situation, he's running away from the officer. So the officer's life is definitely not in danger.
Well, you're wrong. You're wrong. That's logical, but you're wrong. Because at the trial, Officer Rosfeld did not state that. Officer Rosfeld said that he felt like his life was in jeopardy. Like he felt there was a threat on his life. He also said that he thought a gun was pointed at him. Now, think about this situation now. Now, I really want you to really, if you've seen the video, if you know the details of this case, I really want you to think about this. There was a report of a vehicle that was involved in a drive-by shooting. So Officer Michael Rosfeld pulls over this vehicle. He's thinking that I'm thinking that any officer that is present in circumstances like this feels like there's an increased sense of being alert. This might be a situation where I might have to use my weapon.
And we understand that.
And we totally understand that. Now, if the suspects that were fleeing the vehicle were running towards him and he pulled the weapon and shot at them, I think, I can't see it. I can kind of try to, draw that image in my head. But I would think that that might be a justified shooting because you don't know. If they're running right at you and you know this vehicle was just involved in drive-by shooting, that might be a significant threat on your life. So if he shot in that circumstance, that might be justified. Very much so. That might be justified. But the problem I have here is that this officer seemed not to be able to understand if people were running towards him or away from him.
So I'm questioning his ability to observe situations objectively if he cannot tell I guess the threat level based on the actual situation. When somebody's like running away from you, in order for them to be a threat, as far as how he laid it out, like that Antwon was going to shoot him, he would have to be running away and pow pow going like that. That's what would have to be happening. If that was happening, I can see that being a police officer's reaction. If somebody was actually running away this way, in that direction, but they had a gun pointed behind their head or behind their waist going like this, pow, 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 just shooting at the air, then yes, that is the proper reaction. But
actually, the proper reaction would be to duck.
Well, when I say proper, I mean like, I guess looking at it as all the likely reactions. The likely reactions.
Yeah.
I would understand it. I'm not saying that would be the ideal or appropriate one, but I can see that being the case if Antwon or anyone else in that situation was doing that. And that's not what he was doing. Like, you have to be completely, unaware of your surroundings. You're not qualified to have any job if you can't recognize that.
And so what this Officer Rosfeld, is asking us and asking the jury to believe, which seems like they did, he asked that jury to believe that even though the suspects were fleeing, running away from him, it was reasonable for him to perceive a threat on his life. It was reasonable for him to pull out his gun and shoot at people running away from him. He said that this was a split, or I don't know if it's him or his attorney that said this was a split-second decision. He perceived a threat on his life, so he took action. I don't understand how this could be justifiable whatsoever. But the jury foreman, whose name is Jesse Rawls Jr., he was interviewed this weekend. He was interviewed by WHTM TV in Harrisburg, Pittsburgh. No, I'm sorry. He was interviewed by WHTM TV in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I guess he tried to explain how the jury came to a decision that they came to. And so this is a little bit of video from that interview.
You make a stop, a felony stop. Someone just shot up someone else. How do you approach it? Do you approach it the way this guy approached it, which he did? Maybe he should have waited to a backup car. A backup car came. By the time the backup car came, the guys jumped out and ran. If the kids wouldn't have jumped out and ran, we wouldn't have never been in the situation. So put onus on the young men in the car. Why did they jump and run?
If those other two kids would have complied like the first young person, you and I wouldn't be talking?
We wouldn't be talking. We wouldn't be talking. If they wouldn't have jumped out of the car and ran. wouldn't be talking. But they bought it on themselves. So most young folks, you just have to obey the law. Because if you don't, some bad things can happen.
Put the onus on them. It was their fault. It's incredibly disappointing, and it's disgusting to hear words like that come from anybody.
But I know where you're going. But go ahead, man.
I'm gonna let you go there.
Okay.
But
okay.
Nobody said that it was a good idea for Antwon Rose to bolt from the vehicle, run from the vehicle. Nobody said that was a good idea. I wouldn't advise that to anybody to run from the police, because in a lot of cases it doesn't end well. So I would not support a decision like that. But that's besides the point here. I could say that what if Antwon Rose was the individual that was doing the shooting? What if he had just killed a man? It doesn't matter who Antwon Rose was at that point, because the job of a police officer is to not act. It is not to act as a judge, jury, and executioner. It's to perform the responsibilities of a police officer and apprehend the suspect, whoever that suspect is. If the suspect is fleeing you, you do not have the right to shoot them in the back to stop them. So again, nobody is arguing that Antwon Rose made the correct decision and ran from the vehicle. But what I am saying is that it should definitely be illegal for Officer Rosfeld or any police officer to shoot somebody in the back running away from them.
You know what it sounds like he's saying? It sounds like he's saying that people, when police officers encounter them, have to act perfectly. Mm-hmm. And if they do not act perfectly, then they deserve whatever they got.
Yep.
Whatever they got. They deserve whatever they got. But
he put himself in this situation.
But law enforcement officers that put themselves in situations and don't act perfectly, they're given a pass, right? Mm-hmm. That's interesting to me.
We've seen officers that put their bodies in the way of vehicles and then have to shoot.
Now, before the show, you kind of related this to another case.
Oh, I did.
With another individual who got shot in the back.
Right.
Because if this young man, he was a jury foreman, right?
Yeah.
Jury foreman said that Antwon Rose brought this upon himself. These men brought this upon himself just for running away.
Just for running away.
How does that apply to
Walter Scott? Walter Scott was not a young man. Mm. He was an older man. And that was in, what was that, North Charleston?
That was close to us.
Yeah, that was in South Carolina some years back. And he ran from an officer. To say he ran is a stretch.
That is a stretch. To say he jogged is a stretch.
Would be a stretch. It was like a leisurely stroll. He
was strolling while doing the motions of running.
Right.
But he was moving that slow.
He wasn't getting anywhere. But the officer shot him down and killed him. Now, that officer was convicted of homicide. I believe he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. So the question I would have is, if this is the analysis from this jury foreman, Jerry Rawls Sr., if you're saying that Antwon Rose is guilty of his own demise, he's guilty of his own killing because he simply ran from the vehicle, and you're not supposed to do that when you're confronted with police officers, then I guess he would have the same opinion with Walter Scott.
And, before I go in on this dude, I want to give praise and I want to give credit and acknowledge those individuals that are baby boomers, specifically black males, that still have their head on straight about what young black males are going up against. Because unfortunately, I've seen this amongst a lot of older black men, specifically ones over 50 and 60 years old. And for the most part, when police approach them, for the most part, policemen don't see them as a threat. And I think they forget that. They see younger black males as a threat. So then they internalize how police officers treat them, and they extrapolate that out to everyone else. And they think that police officers perceive everyone else, every other black male, every young black male, the same way police officers perceive them. And that is not the case. There are some cases where a lot of older men suffer abuse at the hands of police officers. But for the most part, police officers do not see black males, specifically over 50, over 60 years old, as a threat. So typically, they get treated differently by law enforcement. So I just think that there's this disconnect that a lot of older black men have in regard to how police treat like young black males. The disconnect that exists with a lot of other people too, a lot of other groups, a lot of people who are not black. It's that same disconnect. Well, they don't treat me like that, you know.
He must not have heard of Walter Scott. Walter Scott. He must not have heard
exactly, because I mean he was like in his 40s, right? But still, but I'm just saying for the most, he might have been older than that.
He was
but like for the most part, they don't get treated the same way because they're
No.
perceived the same way. So it's about perception, and I think he's kind of a little detached or disconnected from that reality as it comes to people who are younger than him that have his skin color.
The point here is though is it is beyond nonsensical. It's offensive to put Antwon Rose's death on Antwon Rose. If Antwon Rose was effectively captured and charged with anything, well then that would have been on him. He didn't deserve to die because he ran away. Running away is not a crime. Running away doesn't mean that there's a threat on Officer Rosfeld's life. So this death isn't on Antwon Rose, it's on Officer Rosfeld. But in less than 4 hours, like I said earlier, this jury was able to trample all over justice and protect another officer who was clearly guilty of murder.